this particular story now, this happened over 9 days ago. However, the repercussions have really been seen quite extensively on social media. And although, we may not all be on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and whatnot, what happens to one person can actually happen to many of us. Now, if you have ever been prevented from going into a venue for wearing a religious symbol, an item that's an important part of your religion and defines you, then you may understand how Amrit Singh felt, because Amrit Singh, a Sikh student, was actually asked to leave the club Rush. It's in Nottinghamshire. He was actually asked to leave because he was wearing a turban. The club has a policy, and the policy is a no headgear policy, but they failed to acknowledge actually that this is a religious importance of wearing a turban.
And this is in Nottingham.
Now, the nightclub, I must say, did issue a statement shortly after the incident where they offered their sincere apologies for any upset, hurt or distress that was caused. But, and this is the big but, this has opened up a wider discussion with regards to how much do we actually understand when it comes to a turban. In this country, we're so fortunate we have so many different religions, celebrate all of this multiculturalism and diversity. But do we actually know what a Sikh is and what wearing a turban means? Well, we're joined in the studio now by Amandeep Singh, who is a lawyer, a Sikh educator and also a charity worker. Amandeep, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me.
Must say thank you so very much, firstly, for having waited before coming on air today. The first question we have for you is what we just mentioned. Can you explain in the briefest of terms, what is a turban?
Well, thanks again for having me here. I'll do my very best. I think it's important to understand what the turban is, because without putting it in context, it's quite easy to sort of ask the question, well, why is everybody getting so worked up? Now, if you look at Sikh history, we have a very wonderful and decorated history of standing up against tyrannical regimes. We're a martial race that have always gone to places where people have suffered difficulties and offered our services. Obvious examples, obviously being the most obvious example being the Second World War, where 83,000 Sikhs joined forces with the Allied forces and gave their lives. 100,000 were wounded and 83,000 Sikhs died fighting that very vicious and tyrannical regime in Germany. Now, the context of the turban comes to be a little bit earlier than that. You go back about 350 years, and in the Indian subcontinent, there was in fact a time when a Mughal regime was invading India and looking to try and subdue the people of India, and Islam was being spread by the sword across the Indian subcontinent. Lots and lots of people were being discriminated. They were being persecuted in large numbers. Many hundreds of thousands of people died at the hands of that very barbarous regime. It was in that context that, in fact, the ninth Guru of the Sikhs gave their physical life. They actually sacrificed their physical being for the rights and freedoms of Hindus to carry on practicing their faith and not actually convert from their faith to Islam under that regime. When they gave their life, many people were saved and they were allowed to continue to prosper within their own freedoms. I call that a true democracy. The rights and freedoms of people being protected is what a true democracy should be. And it was in that context that the 10th Guru, the Guru that succeeded the 9th, he asked a question: did anybody stand up for the Guru before me when he was in fact standing up for those that were being persecuted? And there was a silence in the congregation, and it was in that context that the Guru said, no, I'm going to excuse me, I'm going to give my Sikhs such an appearance, I'm going to give them such a wonderful code that they will always remain unique and distinct in their appearance, such that any member of the public in the whole world will be able to look at a Sikh and recognise, but look, that person's a Sikh. He's Gurus stand up against the freedoms of all people, and if we are in trouble, that this is a person that we can turn to for assistance. In years to come, in 1699, the Guru gave us the Khalsa Code. The 10th Guru gave us the 5 Ks, and the turban has pretty much been synonymous with the Sikhs since that time. It very much stands for the rights and the right to be free, the right to stand up against oppression and tyranny, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, when the call came for people that were suffering in the Second World War, the Sikhs went valiantly to try and stand up for those freedoms. The irony being that we have a situation now where that very turban that stands for the rights and freedoms of people was being used against the turban wearer, and he was the person that suffered that discrimination. He was the person that was being humiliated, which is, you can see the irony in that.
You've given us quite, I have to say, a perfect kind of abbreviated version of that history, but it's a bite size that people, I think, can digest. Stay with us. We're going to pick up on what you've just said straight after the traffic and travel now. It's 7:15. Now, very good evening. It's Sunny and Shay here on BBC Radio London. We're going to pick up straight where we left off just before we went to travel. We've been speaking to Amandeep Singh. Now, Amandeep Singh is a lawyer. He is a Sikh educator and also he is a charity worker. And he's been giving us just some context with regards to why a turban is worn within the Sikh community. We're talking about this after Amrit Singh, a Sikh student, was asked to leave a nightclub called Rush in Nottinghamshire because he was wearing a turban. The club had a no headgear policy, but they failed to acknowledge the religious importance of wearing a turban. And this is something, Sonny, you and I were talking about even as soon as we heard about this, that actually how many people in this country understand the context of a turban?
And also religious wear. I mean, if you have the same experience, please get in touch with the show. We'll try to get you on before the end of the show. The number is 0207 224 2000.
Now, Amandeep, you were talking about the turban in the context of the history of it. Why is it important for you now, in 2018 to be wearing a turban? You talked about the history of, fighting oppression in the Mughal Empire in 1699. What about now in 2018, though? Why is it just as important for you as a Sikh to have this headgear?
I think that's a fantastic question. Well, look, if you think about it in this context, there's never going to be a time when freedom and true democracy isn't something that's important to all people. That's what we celebrate as being Brits in this country. We're the Sikhs are fully integrated into the British value system, and part of that value system is the notion that we are free as people. And that turban, which I like to call it my crown, if you like, it's something which I wear on my head every single morning. I tie my turban, and it reminds me that when I'm going out, that I've got an obligation as a moral citizen of this country, of this world, to help people that are in need. And there will always, so long as there will always be people in need, there will always be need for that turban, if you like, that notion that we should stand up against people that are who are oppressing people and stand up for those people that are being oppressed. I'll give you a really obvious example that happened to me. A very curious example that happened to me in December of last year. I was flying back. I was blessed to have a chance to do some charitable work in northern India, and I was on the aeroplane. I was watching the movie. I was watching Batman. I'm looking across at Sonny's got a Deadpool t-shirt.
I have indeed, yes.
We had that debate about which superheroes, but we'll leave that for another day. But I was watching the movie, and this lady comes and sits next to me, and she goes, "Excuse me, Mr. Singh, would you mind if I sit next to you?" And I said, "Look, I'm perfectly happy for you to sit next to me. What's the problem?" And she said, "There's a couple of guys back there, and they're giving me a bit of a hard time, and I'd feel much more comfortable if I could sit next to you." Now, what was it that made her think that she could approach me and say to me that I was
safe around this man? Yeah.
You know what I mean? And from I didn't speak to her about it, but I felt very proud of that. She was from a slightly older generation, and she knew the value system that was associated with the turban. Those that know, if you know what I mean.
Can I also ask you, when you look at some of the images, some of the conversations around radicalization, and also the Sikh community is part of that conversation as well, and across not only here in America, but in America and Canada, we have turban-wearing Sikhs who are taking on certain battles and conversations which don't put them in a positive light, which doesn't put them in what you've just painted a picture of. What do you say to critics of what you've just said and said, not everyone has those ideals, just like not every non-wearing turban Sikh would have not the same ideals. Like there might be a Sikh right now listening and saying, I do everything this man just does. I just don't wear the turban. I don't have a beard and everything else. Does it make me any less of a person?
Well, I think you've asked three separate questions. I'll try and address them as best I can. But going with the last question first, if I may, about it's about identity. So if you think about it, a police force can be an effective force, but if they are not there to be recognised, that's a great deal of what they do. They walk the streets of London, the police, they serve us, they give us that feeling of safety. And one of the things that gives us safety is their presence, the knowledge of their presence, because you can see them. Whenever there's an incident where there's a crime on the street, there's a massive police presence there to make the community feel more safe.
Right.
That is what the turban is there for in the historical context and the present context as well. If you look in Punjab, if you look at where the Sikh homeland is, if you like, and if you look at parts of the country, in this country, which have a large population of Sikhs, like Southall, for example, during the riots that were taking place, it was the Sikhs that came out and gave that presence for all shopkeepers and all people to know. The BBC covered it very well to say, look, the Sikhs are here. This is going to rhyme, have no fear, because they have this turban, this wonderful bright coloured turban that you can recognise, and it's there to say that I'm here to serve you, I'm here to protect you. That's what it comes for. Going back to the earlier question about radicalisation, again, that is the very thing that the turban stands against. If you look at the historical context, the turban exists for people.
But again, I see you going back to history again.
I wasn't going to go back to the historical. Okay. I say the turban exists to stand up against people who are being tyrannous in their regime. So the idea that Sikhs are radical because they wear a turban, if that's what
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I understand that when you wear a turban, and I've got family who wear turbans who have the same identity as yourself and have the same principles, and that when they wear it with pride, and they know that as soon as I put that on, I'm not representing myself, I'm also representing my guru and that connection to their spirituality, which is separate from my spirituality and what have you. But what about the men and women who wear that turban and are not respecting the turban the way you do, and therefore that image that gets projected across the world?
To come in on that, I mean, with regards to Amandeep Singh, we have seen, and rightly so, as Sunny says, on social media, there are some people saying, well, as a Sikh, he shouldn't even been in a nightclub.
Judging straight away.
Judging him because of the fact he's wearing a turban. Why was he in the nightclub in the first place? Do you see that angle that you're coming from?
Look. The way that I'd say this is you could look at it on a macro or a micro scale. I'm not here to morally judge anybody.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
And look, I'm not here to morally judge anybody. Yes, you could say you could argue whether he should or shouldn't have been there. Sikhs traditionally shouldn't. You could get into those debates about whether Sikhs should
That's drink. His choice, right? Yeah, and his relationship.
I mean, Sikhs don't drink, and perhaps he shouldn't have been there. But the point is this: when you drag it into a micro debate about an individual, this could just as easily have happened at a theatre tomorrow.
Yes,
with me and my daughter.
Yeah.
And the real issue here is that we don't want this conversation to get dragged into the mud by looking at something that's really, if your house is on fire, you don't worry about the paint. You don't look at the individual, the microcosm. If you look at the big picture is that we are in the country that leads democracy across the world. We have a situation in Nottinghamshire in 2018. People don't understand what the turban is and who the Sikhs are, who settled here 60, 70 years ago.
A lot further back. And in the 19th, you can go back as far as that. In the First World War, we know that there was that contribution from the Sikh community.
Yes, correct. And then you've got and B, you have a situation where if they do know, there's just massive discrimination.
So can I ask you, do you think it's also to do with not only the lack of understanding or not the willingness to know about certain communities? Yes, straight up.
I think there is a massive ignorance there because, I'll give you a really sad example. In September, in 9/11, the first people that were being shot dead in America, on the streets of America, were Sikhs.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not advocating anybody being shot dead. I'm making it clear. But what I'm saying is they've completely got it wrong when they've gone out and they've seen Sikhs. Sikhs have been suffering at the hands of Islamic extremism going back since we were initiated as Sikhs 500 years ago. So there's a certain irony in Islamic extremism. Them being this reason why we're being shot dead in the streets of America.
Do you feel that in this country we need to have, Sunny and I, we've talked about this many a time about, yes, you can go into schools and there may be, a quick kind of lesson in RE about, religion like Sikhism or Hinduism and whatnot. But what about in the history books? Do you think a big part of this is the fact that actually in this country, a lot of Brits don't even know their own history in terms of the British Empire, the relationship that, let's say, Sikhs have with this country, even Hindus, Muslims, Asians as a whole who have come from the Indian subcontinent?
I think that there's a massive gap in education in that regard. I think it would be a fantastic thing. I have often discussed this in the education system. I sit on certain panels on standing advisory committee for RE with Essex, for example's sake.
Brilliant.
And we often find that there is just a massive ignorance there. There's a certain... It's really sad though, because if you look at the majority of Sikhs that have come to settle in this country, have settled around the 40s, and they've come at a time after the Second World War where those efforts, which I spoke about earlier, were recognised by the British establishment. Winston Churchill, if you Google Winston Churchill on Sikhs, he's got only glowing things to say. I think he uses the word indebted, that the Allied forces were indebted to the contributions of those Sikhs that went to fight against the Nazi regime. The irony being that the Sikhs effectively have settled upon invitation, but the hosts in that regard, in terms of the British people before the Sikhs have come here, there hasn't been a great deal of effort to educate people about those people that are being invited.
Right.
And so do you know what I mean? If you invite someone to your house for tea, and then you don't make them a food that they can eat because you've not taken the time to educate yourself as to what they eat.
What's the point of inviting them in the first place?
So can I also ask you as well, like, when we talk about this case as well with this young man, and also there's been a report of a McDonald's which refused entry to a Muslim woman who was wearing a hijab. and she was distraught that she's saying, I'm live in Britain and I just want to go in and get myself a milkshake and you're stopping me. And this was, and later they found out the gentleman the man who was the security guard was from Europe, and he had no interaction, didn't understand the complex and the history of the people who are settled here as British citizens, who are Sikhs, Muslims and Hindus, right? So if you have a religious a garment on and that's how you practice your religion, do you think that's something that might be also overlooked when we are looking at people who are migrating or immigrating to this country and not picking up the people who are already here and not knowing how to interact with them?
Yes, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. What makes us great as a nation is the diversity, and that's not. It's becoming a cliche now, but I truly mean those words.
Yeah.
That's who we are. We are citizens of this country. We insofar as we integrate the value system, and if we accept that, we should also be accepted. It's a two-way thing. So you can't be expected to integrate, accept the value system, and then not have your values even recognised. It's got to be two-way. It's not just all one way.
So is an apology enough for an incident like this, or should it be something more than that so that it doesn't keep repeating itself? Because right now, if it doesn't hurt your pocket, I mean, in America, compensation speaks volumes, and so do you think that we will have to go to a place where if someone's being discriminated against, there has to be more of a penalty than just a sorry, this was a misunderstanding, and all of those kind of excuses that come after these kind of events?
Look, I don't ever think an apology is enough. We need education. Apology isn't even. I don't value an apology if it's not going to be acted upon.
Right. You're a lawyer, though, so I think this is from a law perspective. This would be great to get in context. What would you say that someone should be doing in this scenario?
It's about the age-old adage. It's the age-old adage of arm yourself with knowledge. Mm-hmm. Now you'll find this very difficult to believe, but one of the reasons I picked this story up and I was gotten in contact with. I'm a practicing lawyer. I've been practicing for 10 years now.
Right.
I was denied access to the Redbridge Magistrates Court as a practicing advocate, and I went to court to represent a client. I wasn't, they denied. I was denied access. It was humiliating. It was embarrassing. I've been born in this country. I know no other country than this one, than the countries I've visited on holiday. I went to visit. I've been educated here to the highest level.
How did you deal with that as a situation? Because because of your turban is what you're saying.
No, it was an article of faith. I was wearing the 5Ks.
Okay.
And it could well have been exactly the same thing. Now, I was the perfect candidate, in inverted commas, if you want to put it that way, because I could deal with the situation. I was embarrassed.
You knew the law.
I knew the law. But I won't get onto I won't go too in much the detail. We have a principle of rule of law in this country. The idea is that the law should be transparent for all people, so that nobody can say, I didn't know.
Right.
That's why I broke it. So the rule of law governs above all things, which is why you can download all the law legally on the internet. It's all very much available. Now, if you go to a place of an establishment like the Magistrates Court, you would expect there to be the highest level of education there. I was put aside. I was treated effectively like a criminal. I was put quite literally in the area where all the defendants were.
Wow.
And I was put there. I had a 45-minute grilling by the security guards. Can I mention the security company's name? Because they've been
bear with us, because I want to come back to you.
Yeah, we just got to go to news and travel. We don't interrupt this.
And I think it's an important lesson in that what you're talking about. It doesn't matter what your faith. As you said, you should know the law of the land, which I think sometimes is something that a lot of us, I generally probably don't myself, and on all of the nitty and gritty bits that you should be aware of. So we'll continue talking with Amandeep Singh. Alongside that, we'll also be joined in the studio by Interpol Sandhu. And a very good evening. It's Sunny and Shay here on BBC Radio London. The time now is 7:34. We're still joined in the studio by Amandeep Singh. He's a lawyer, Sikh educator and also charity worker. And he's been talking to us quite extensively about the history of the turban, why he feels it needs to be recognised in this country, but also the 5Ks. Now, before we went to the news and travel, you were talking about the fact that you were actually stopped in magistrates. You're a lawyer, and you were were going to a particular case, but you were stopped because you had a turban. For anyone who doesn't know, what is that, and what is the law of the land in terms of why you were okay to be wearing that, even though you were going to court?
Fantastic question. So as baptised Sikhs, we have our articles of faith, which are mandatory. These are things which we keep on us. They're often described as 5 additional limbs to the human body of a baptised Sikh. So they cannot be removed from the Sikh body. And one of those, the one that's most prominently recognised is spoken about, I should say, is the ceremonial sword, which is there to remind us of our duty to serve. So in the historical context, you can see how that's been borne out. I won't go about that again. Yeah. But nowadays, how it reminds us of our duty to serve. By giving food in the free kitchen. So we're serving about 6 million meals a day, across the world. That's the BBC stats for 2016. 6 million meals a day across the world to refugees or people who are in need. And so that sort of there as a reminder of a duty to serve. I was at Barkingside. Redbridge Magistrates Court, formerly known as Barkingside Magistrates Court, and I was denied access there to see my client and represent him because I was wearing that article of faith. Now, the law protects that right, going back to Churchillian days when it was recognised for the efforts that the sword was used in the Allied forces. Section 392 of the Criminal Justice Act, I think it's Section 392, but it's definitely the Criminal Justice Act, CJA 1998, and that protects the rights for Sikhs to wear that ceremonial sword as part of their religious dress, as part of the Articles of Faith. I had this debate with the security team.
You had a debate with a security guard.
They were. Well, I was denied access. I was told that you're not going in. I said I am.
Yeah.
I nearly said it.
I know.
I said I am going in, mate. There's no chance of you stopping me at these gates.
Yeah.
They called their security guard supervisor, and
it just escalated to the next.
They just took it all away. In the end, I just beat them down with the law, so to speak, and I was allowed access. I wrote them a pretty, put it sort of vexatious email, and they came back to me. They apologised again. This is why I put this word apology in inverted commas, which is why you said it isn't apology enough. No, it's not, because I was the one person, and I don't mean this in an arrogant sense. I was the able-bodied man on the day.
Yeah.
Another guy wouldn't have been allowed in,
and he would have walked off.
Who would have known? Maybe you'd have taken it off. And do we want to be that kind of society that we are denying people their rights to be free? The very thing that the turban is standing against.
Okay.
If you think about that context.
And so maybe we would love to get you back in again and talk about religion and how the law protects us and the people who are wearing religious artifacts as well. And do we need a little bite-sized book that we can walk around with?
I know. Maybe.
Instead of going on the internet every minute, just a small book to say if you are someone who's wearing religious garments or something that represents your religion, this is how you're protected.
Well, interesting you say that. There's some fantastic cutting edge work being done by some friends of mine at a great charity called Basics of SikhPA, and they've produced
they've been regular on our show.
They've developed a very short book for those practicing Sikhs that are out there that need that sort of formalised so they can have it in their wallet to give out. It's a fantastic little thing which they've produced. It's about the size of a 2p coin. Brilliant. And it's got all of the law and the history there for those practicing Sikhs that are having this difficulty.
How can they get it?
If you contact Basics of SikhPA, SIKHI is the last word there, and ask them for the Kirpan booklet or the ceremonial sword booklet, they'll be happy to email it out to you for you to print off or send it out in the post.
Now, stay with us, Amandeep.
While you were speaking to us, we had a caller who picked up the phone and gave us a ring. Is John from Wood Green. Hello, John. How are you?
How you doing? I'm great. Eventually, my football team won. Eventually, so
bless you.
I'm so glad it worked out for you, John. Now, John, what did you want to weigh in on this conversation?
The football's irrelevant compared to this. I live in North London now, but I just wanted to say that I spent almost my entire life living in Ealing in West London, which means that the area of Southall was part of my neighbourhood.
Yes.
I'm an atheist, and I don't like to describe myself as a white man, but that's what I am. I'm not Asian, so I have no particular reason or special reason to support any religion. But the Sikh people and the rest of the community in Southall have an extraordinary sense of community. I've done lots of community work and charity work and political work in Southall over years. I mean, I stood on the streets in the early 80s when the National Front tried to march through there as well. Wow. And the Sikhs were always there doing what was necessary. And Also, I spent 10 weeks in Ealing Hospital in 1975 when I was quite seriously ill, and every week the Sikh community used to come along and give every single patient that wanted one in the hospital a box of fruit. It's things like that they do. And
it doesn't get highlighted, does it? I mean, because the Sikhs don't do it to say, oh, look what we are doing as a community, and that's what, and when something goes wrong, that's when these reports come out and say, look how bad this community is.
But we have a responsibility to find out. I want to know about. I ask people from different religions and different cultures questions because I want to know. I know what this. Your guest hasn't told me anything about the turban that I didn't already know. I know about their history. I know what the Dalwa Shamiz is. I know how to, and why wouldn't I? I live in a society, thank God, when I'm surrounded by people of loads of different cultures. I can't think of anything worse than just being surrounded by English people, and I am English,
Well,
John, I'm really glad you've called in tonight.
Your guess, that's the first time I'd heard this story, and I think it's disgraceful, and I just wanted him and anyone else who's listening that I'm on your side, and I would be out on the street. And I'm quite old now, so taking to the barricades I'm probably not the best person. But
John,
I would do.
You picked up the phone, and I think that speaks volumes. Thank you, John.
Thank you
take
very
care.
much for calling in, John.
Cheers.
Thank you for that. I know, Amandeep, you were smiling away, and I'm sure you appreciated that. Unfortunately, time is against us. Just
quickly, Ron, you want to respond to him, didn't you?
You did want to respond to him and talk about SWAT and the work that they are doing, because it continues with what John's talking about in terms of selfless service.
I do. I was trying to do, but just before I do that, I just want to say I've actually learned something. John's put it so concisely. What he said, the one thing he said, which I have learnt from, and I probably will use this and repeat this when I'm talking on a government level with organisations, is he said, I live in a society. Why wouldn't I want to know about the people in my society?
Exactly.
We don't live in confinement as solitaries. We live in a society, and I think he's put it better than I could have done. So thank you for that, John. Guys, thanks for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed it. I wanted to just do a quick shout out to SWAT, which is the Sikh Welfare and Awareness Team. Yes. They are on the streets of London town battling this blizzard this evening. They're out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Sunday nights. They're feeding about 1,000 people a week outside Charing Cross Police Station. And when I say this is gourmet food, I don't mean this is... We're not talking about pot noodles here. They make some pretty amazing feast type meals, and they're giving them out right now. So if anybody's passing by, they want to go give them a pat on the back or help out with the service, please feel free to go down there.
And what's important as well, you don't have to be Sikh to go and help.
No, just SWAT,
like Sikh Welfare Awareness Team. We were very lucky we had them in the show at the end of the year, so maybe come in with them as well. We'd love to follow up.
Fantastic.
You'd be up for that?
100%.
Fantastic.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys.
A real pleasure having you here. Thank you so very much. So very well informed. We did, by the way, take a video of what Amandeep Singh was talking about with regards to the history of the turban. We will be playing that out on BBC Radio London Facebook page as well. Thanks again, Amandeep.
Cool.